Adeptus Group brings you the Disruption Driven podcast with host Alex Robbins. Enjoy.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Disruption Driven podcast with my guest Rob Thomas. While the world is distracted by cloud transformation still somehow and the innovation within AI and machine learning, there is another transformation which is slowly boiling away with all the directives to electrify vehicles within the next decade. Governments globally are pushing electrification, and there are numerous businesses that depend on fleets globally. So with the eradication of diesel vehicles impending, there's a huge transformation that nobody's talking about. And Rob is here to talk to us about that today, as well as his company that helps businesses with the IT transformation that's associated with vehicle electrification. So Rob, introduce yourself.
Yeah, Alex, I appreciate it. So I'm Rob Thomas, not Matchbox 20 Rob Thomas, which I get all the time. But we do, so our company, Cameron Cooley, helps everyone transform into EVs. And that means, and when I say everybody, I mean from the commercial side on the fleet end, and also we're doing that and helping that on more of the public side as well, specifically for multi-unit dwellings. So we kind of are trying to look for these areas where that transformation is difficult, right? Where it becomes difficult to move from a gas or ICE powered car into an EV, and what that friction is, right? And really try to solve that. So obviously there's a lot of that in the fleet space, but we're also seeing some of that, particularly in the US, around anyone that lives in a apartment, condo, a flat, as you guys call it. So that's kind of where we specialize. And I have a long career in technology and just being an innovator and standing up new ideas and trying to design new solutions for things that are kind of tough to solve. So
talk to me a little bit about that, because reading up on your background and obviously having spoken to you a couple of times already, you came from more of a kind of compliance and risk background initially, right?
Yeah, so my background is more in professional consulting services. So I've done a lot of risk management, and that's actually what I got my degree in, is risk management and insurance. Believe it or not, I did that for a few years and decided that is not what I wanted to do. I do like risk management, but insurance was just not for me. So so I moved out of that quickly into technology in the late '90s, and I've been doing that ever since. So, but yeah, had a great career. just driving cloud transformation, big data. IT security, cybersecurity, all of those things. And, I'm an innovator, and I'm really an entrepreneur at heart. And so if there's not some entrepreneurial challenge, I got to go find that. And that's kind of what I focus on. But yeah, so this is something I got into energy about 5 years ago, kind of through solar and looking at solar and microgrid and storage solutions, and that's even come a long way in the last 5 years. But EV is really kind of where I landed, and it's something that I think I can make a big impact, across everyone's lives with that, and help make it for the better.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to something you said there about being an innovator, because you were working with EMC on cloud before it was even really cloud, right? It was kind of data warehouses back then.
Cloud was the new buzzword back then. It's come a long way since then. Now it's, why aren't you on cloud already, right? but yeah, so we, one of the things that we do is, so we help on both sides of this fleet transformation equation, right? If you think about it, right? There's typically that's driven by an operations team or someone bubbling up from more the fleet management side saying, hey, we need to think about how we're going to do this in the coming years, or we want to go pilot something and very, very quickly. Obviously in the US, California is driving that initiative. They've got the strictest, state laws about, phasing out ICE vehicles and getting EV vehicles back in to replace those. And but that can come from more of the operation side. And typically it's not driven by the IT side. I think we can all fairly say, right? So, but this is a software driven platform that we're talking about, like putting in. So, and replacing ICE. So that's something where, we also help the CIO and the IT organization deal with that impending change and vetting through all the different designs and technologies that are out there, because a lot of them are new, and they, these are, as with any new field or burgeoning field, you're seeing it in AI right now, you're seeing it in EV, you're seeing it in all kinds of different green energy spaces. it's a new space. So with that, you have a whole bunch of entrepreneurs, myself included, right, coming out of the woodwork with new ideas and new ways of solving problems. But typically, any new company, as you have only so much budget. You have only so much you can do, so many features you
Right.
could put in. And so you pick the critical ones that are important to your MVP, and then you go. And so what that means though is that when you're a big corporation and you're trying to select an EV platform and design that, put that
Mm.
together, you're dealing with companies that are very young. And so those companies that are very young, right? How do you know, and will they disclose and be open with you about what they can do, what they can't
Mm.
do, what feature sets they really have now versus what they're promising? What's their cybersecurity stance? Is it something that you've taken some risk there? You really have to think through and vet these guys out and be very careful, from an IT perspective, because you don't want to compromise the integrity of your own systems by putting something
Mm.
in that you know, could be a problem. So that's something we help manage on the IT side as well as the fleet side, where we do the whole strategy piece and walk through, how are we going to do this? Where are we going to have the depots? What's the right depot solution for you? Is it managed charging where you manage it
Mm.
yourself? Is it a CAS solution where it's charging as a service and you don't own anything? All the way through pilot and then, and rolling out trucks over multiple years.
So if you kind of strip it right back to basics, because I think there's going to be a lot of people listening who have got nothing to do with EV, they're just listening out of interest. There's also going to be plenty of people who have a fleet, for example, but haven't even thought about this transformation yet. So if you strip it right back to basics, what does an EV stack look like? From the the physical vehicle right to the kind of infrastructure that you need.
Yeah, great question. So, the EV tech stack looks like, obviously the vehicle itself, right? Then you have the charger, then you have the energy source, then you have the charge point operator, CPO, you have energy management systems, you have fleet management systems, you've got the telematics and connectivity, and then you have the IoT platform that it sits on. So that's the whole stack. The only company right now, by the way, that owns that entire stack and
Mm.
controls it is Tesla. And that's why Tesla is able to do the things that they're able to do and have that great customer
Mhm.
experience. That's more on up till the Tesla semi truck is coming out, obviously, but up until now, that's been more in the private, personal car space. But that's something where the reason why they have been able to accomplish what they've been able to accomplish. Now, you go to a commercial fleet and what's happening right now in that space, you've got everyone coming out with their own version of an EV truck, whether it's class 3 to class 8. And those are great products, but they don't own the whole tech stack. And so that's part of their problem that you have is you've got all these great companies out there. There's new energy management system companies that are coming out of the woodwork that have some really
Right.
great technology, but they don't own the rest of the stack. They may connect to the layer above or below them. So that presents some challenges, right? And so that's kind of where, we think through that is, where are you in the stack? How are you going to long term, for what your vision is for your company, integrate up or
Mm.
down? And then where does that play well with our strategy and what we're trying to accomplish? And then at the end of the day, none of this works, Alex, if it doesn't make
Right. Of
financial
course.
sense. That's the number one goal, right? There is no business in the world that will ever take this on without knowing that what their ROI is, what their net present value is going to be on this equipment. When you know and you might be the most environmentally conscious person in the world,
Mm.
but you really need to make sure that it's financially viable, or otherwise you're going to shoot yourself in the foot.
Just on that subject of kind of integration and interoperability, I guess even in the consumer market for EVs, there's a bunch of different chargers and connector points and different kind of formats and features for that. So how complex is it to get various different parts of I guess kind of thrown together stack to actually work and talk to each other efficiently?
Well, in the US, you've seen everybody pivot to
Mhm.
NACS, right? And NACS is really, it's a wonderful technology. I mean, like nothing against J1772 or CCS one, type 1 or type 2, but CHAdeMO, all those guys are going to get phased out eventually, as
Mm.
you know, because everyone's chosen that, okay, well, NACS, I don't need to have a different connector type to do it a level 3, fast charge. So, it's just a simpler and more elegant
Yeah.
solution, honestly. And so everyone's going to go that route. But when you're talking about personal cars, that's kind of more on the personal car side. And, it may show itself in the fleet systems as well. I mean, right now, all fleet systems are CCS, ones in America. And so, yeah, so I think it'll be an interesting perspective. I think one of the biggest problems that we have right now in America for that is that a lot of the government funding and subsidies are tied to the fact that you have to have a CCS Type 1 connector on any public level 3 charger that you're going to install. So any NEVI funding and things like that has to have that. That's a big problem, particularly when you have a bunch of all the manufacturers switching to NACS, the Tesla charging connector type. So what does that mean when everybody switches and then they show up? And if you're a charge point operator or you're trying to install these and own and operate them, you're going to have an already outdated connector type. It's just an added cost. It just makes it more expensive for everybody. So there's issues along those lines. There's a lot of things that have yet to be worked out, and that's part of just dealing with the government, and if they can't keep up with changes fast enough.
I was just on a call with another contact of mine who's into cloud transformation, and I mentioned that I've got this podcast coming up, and one of the nuggets that he offered was that the government is out of its tree if it wants everyone to be electrified by whenever it is 2030 or beyond, and I think his view was actually that the consumption in terms of fossil fuels is potentially even more on the EV side than it is currently. So what's the, and I guess that might be a well-known thing, right? That's just part of the problem that we're currently in. So what's the overall kind of industry plan to move more towards a sustainable model of, perhaps powering EVs with more sustainable sources of fuel?
Yeah, and I'm sure he's talking about, the power plants all running on fossil fuels to generate, right? So that's the major issue and the big rub, really. With any technology and change, it takes time to perfect it, right? They were going in the right direction. There's no arguing that. EVs are obviously better long term for the environment if we can clean things up, like our power source. And there's a lot of companies out there, and we take this into consideration for some of the fleets that we design, whether microgrids are a great solution for them, right? Microgrids are solar and battery storage, and so those can be a great solution depending on their power requirements. I'm personally of the mindset that I think the next big innovation is going to come from all of our ability to generate our power on our own.
Yeah.
So every person on the earth should be able to have their own personal power generation system where they can generate enough electricity for whatever it is that they need to do during the day and however much electricity they consume during the day. I'm trying to figure that one out. That's kind of my next, what's buzzing around in my head most of the time. So, but that's the kind of thing where I think long term, we've got to have these power companies, and help them get off these fossil fuels and be able to, find more sustainable ways of generating power. And there's a lot of great innovations. There's new wave technology out there. I know in Europe there's a lot of windmills and people don't like them. There's a big backlash against that, and I get that. So there's all kinds of arguments in different directions for different types of power generation technology. But I think over the years we'll eventually find the right balance, the right mix, and if we can do anything to just reduce the power companies' use of fossil fuels to generate electricity, the better.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to look at kind of initial teething problems and go, oh, it's not working, let's just stick to the old way of doing it. But I guess the key is working through those, as you say. So just on that subject, I shared this anecdote with you on a call previously about the wider physical infrastructure, that obviously certain fleets are going to rely on. If their cars are out on the road, they're going to need to rely on public access charging points, right? I told you that when my fiance's family came down to stay with us, her dad had a MG electric vehicle, which had run out of charge. We took it to a petrol station, a gas station, and used the point there, and it completely shut down the car and had to get a rescue vehicle out to pick it up and sort it out. Had to drive to the MG garage and waited like 4 hours to fix it. So, I mean, I guess you would get breakdowns in any vehicle as well, right? But how does that compare in terms of, how many cars they've got out on the road with a diesel fleet versus an electric fleet? Like how how easy is it to keep business continuity, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, so I mean, it's an important point, right? And that's where when we go into design an EV fleet, we need to know it's all about data, right? It's all data driven design. So we need to know what the duty cycle is of that fleet, how you operate that fleet, what your load is, what the inclines are that you're driving in your route, to what your temperature is and how your temperature fluctuates based on where you are and operate. Those are all critical things that go into calibrating what type of EV truck you need, what battery size you need, what capacity you need to be able to determine what the right solution is for you, what product is, right product is for you. And in some cases, we found that that product doesn't exist yet. The technology just hasn't caught up, and you guys just need to wait, and it'll come around eventually. But the answer may be you're not ready yet. It's just it doesn't fit for what your business needs to do. And I'd rather, you don't want to ever send someone down the path of getting into the situation you're talking about, which is, now I can't run my business because you've designed something for me that doesn't work. That'd be the worst case scenario. We would never do that. So, it's a lot about education, edifying everybody about what it is that's out there and making it make sense. It can be very complex. It could be a little bit overwhelming too when you start to look at this and try to design it on your own. If you're not really, haven't been combing through endless amounts of new companies that come up and the data and what they can do and kind of trying to solve for some of this. And, every day we learn of a new company that's come along that's got some new solution to part of the problem. And that's cool to see. But at the same time, you got to go through that and vet it very carefully. But, in terms of running out of fuel, for example, let's say, for example, Alex, you have a fleet and one of your trucks goes and for some reason they do something that's not common to their everyday route. They just drive a little extra. They have to go cover for another truck that's having a problem, or a driver that's having a problem, and so you would want to plan that out in advance before that truck left the depot. But if you didn't, and let's just say that happened on a emergency basis, and that truck gets stuck out there are ways to get that truck back without having to have it towed in. There are different mobile charging solutions that we sometimes will have contracts with that basically say, hey, you need to keep some of your assets locally around this area so that if we ever have a problem, you can come to our rescue, you can charge us up and at least give us enough energy to get back to the depot where we can charge it fully. So that's kind of the next thing. I don't know if you've heard of companies like Roadie as an example here in the US. There's several, but they have that whole mobile charging solution where they drive a battery pack to you and they basically can charge you.
Normally in diesel vans, right?
No, actually, these guys some do, yes, but these guys actually have EVs, so they
that is good. No, it does always just tickle me when I see these kind of people driving around. There was one that used to pull up on my old apartment car park, and it was all about electric vehicles, plastered all over the van, and of course it's a diesel van. But hey, like you say, we're making progress. So. we did talk before as well about speaking of kind of risk and continuity with certain emerging technologies, particularly AI, but even just for the fact that if a vehicle is fully electronic and it's all running on electronic systems, that presents a lot more security issues in terms of the kind of hackability of a vehicle. How do you approach that?
Yeah, and that kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier about some of these companies being very young and not having a big budget to throw a lot of money at pen testing and cybersecurity and really finding the weaknesses in their products. And that's a challenge, right? Because some of these guys, at the end of the day, they want their new companies. They're trying to sell what they have, and they're not going to tell you, until you find out on your own. Hey, I haven't taken this all the way through. Pen testing, or I don't have all of this figured out yet. Most of them will. I think nowadays most developers are good enough where they can at least include, if you have the right developers, include a good baseline of that to where it can pass muster and more of the common things that are known, like some of the server side attacks and injections and stuff like that have been happening in this market early on, causing some issues that they can design around that. But yeah, so I think that's part of, when you're integrating some of the software, you really need to go through that and, trust but verify. Like, hey, okay, you said you have this, show it to me. And if you don't have it, then I need to go do my own pen testing before I say, yes, we want you a part of our architecture. So there's that. And, you've seen different hacks. You've seen like, in the US, about the infamous one. I think it was, I forgot what brand of charger it is, so I won't say any names incorrectly, but it was the one where they had, Biden on it, basically with his picture on the LCD screen saying, I did this,
Right.
yeah, all those got hacked, to even just simple things, Alex, like connectivity issues that people haven't thought about, which is, almost all of these systems operate on a cellular connectivity, right? So they have a cell signal to whatever's closest to them. And if they lose that connectivity or that drops for any reason, then the system, the charging station doesn't work. And so, all of these should go into free vend at that point if they really want to keep their customers happy. And, a lot of them haven't. There was a big ABB outage up in the New England area recently in September that, it was only for a blip. I think it was for less than a day. But it, caused a lot of heartburn with a lot of people that showed up who were, on that last mile. I've got 8 miles of range and I'm going to this charger. And, you have to have a plan A, B, and a C. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you don't have to do that to get gas. You just pull into the gas station and you know it's there. Right. And so that's the level of maturity that our organizations and our, this whole industry has to go through is, getting past those things where you can really live with these, you can really operate your business on them with 100% certainty. That day will come. It's just a growing pain.
And if you've got a workforce full of, drivers, and I guess endpoint security is a big factor in it as well. How much of what you do is purely just kind of workshops and education for the actual end user?
Oh, a lot. That's actually a big step and part of our process, right? So when we get to, what we do is we help design a strategy for that fleet and that company as far as what would work. And then we take it to the next step, which is, okay, let's go through and let's actually put a huge design together for you. So we design everything from where the depots are going to be, what type of depots they are, what charging systems they need, putting the whole charge management software together, put the energy management software together, whether there's going to be, on-site storage or any kind of microgrid attached to it. And then all the way down to, all right, let's actually stand the infrastructure up and install all of it. That can be a multi-year process just right there. So implementing this is not a very time-friendly thing. So it can take many years to just get the first pilot trucks rolling. So then we get into the next stage, which is pilot trucks. And that is part of where the education comes in for that driver, for the fleet operators, for even the warehouse. Everybody's kind of changing a little bit in terms of what's happening and fine tuning that system, if you will, kind of turning the knobs to make sure that it works well. And then you get to your full rollout where it's over a period of years as you start to sunset ICE trucks and they become fully depreciated, or they're a maintenance problem, whatever. Get them out, swap them out with an EV. That's the plan, right, in terms of the long-term phase rollout. But you have a whole education process that you walk those drivers through, in terms of, because EVs operate differently. They're actually much easier to drive than the class of trucks that we have now. I mean, literally, almost anybody can jump in it and drive it. It's like driving a car. Just you might be pulling a trailer or something like that would be different. So, but yeah, they're very easy to drive. So we have basically education programs and all of that laid out. So the maintenance guys, everyone has a whole slightly different job, and you've got to walk them through what those differences are and train them on that.
Since we first spoke, and I obviously knew this was coming up, and you said how huge this really is, I must admit I've been keeping my eyes peeled for different branded cars, trucks, whatever, whoever has a fleet basically. And I remember you saying to me that you would be surprised what businesses have multiple cars on the road. I've noticed in particular like estate agents or realtors, as you call them. There's like pet grooming companies. Obviously, you've got the big ones like kind of police, fire service, postal services, all that kind of stuff. Have you got a particular focus?
As far as industry goes? No, not really. No, we will help literally anybody from someone that has a fleet of just personal, like class 1, class 2 vehicles, to somebody that's driving class A trucks, and everything in between. So we don't really have an industry focus. We help any industry. We typically try to focus on companies that have fleets of 50 or more vehicles. Typically companies that have smaller than 50 fleets, it is probably not cost advantageous for them to try to take this on at this point. The cost parity is kind of not, it's there, but it's kind of not there in some cases. And it really is a case by case basis. Again, because this is such a new market, a new industry, that without some of the government subsidies, that parity doesn't exist yet. So the technology is not quite cheap enough that really, honestly, to say you don't need subsidies to make it work. And that's kind of where it is. It will get there. And I think that, in some cases, some products are there, so it just is a product by product, scenario where, depending on what you need, does that product exist, at the price point you need, and what government subsidies are there to help you. But yeah, we focus on really any fleet industry or anybody that has a fleet, we're happy to
And
help
what
them out.
are some of the more interesting or bigger projects that you're involved in at the moment then?
So we're doing a couple of different projects. So we have some projects that are really just fleet focused, and we have some projects that are just IT focused. So we have somebody right now that is basically helping really sitting in more of an EV, we call it EV CTO role, to kind of their EV architect for the IT organization, where they're representing the IT organization in that whole design process, so that they are able to, because they are familiar with the EV products that are out there already, they're able to go represent IT and help the rest of the organization design the right EV components. So the charging software, the energy management software, the chargers themselves, whether they have data that sits on the chargers, and, what happens to that data? What data is it? And then all the way to maintenance, right? So, like, who's responsible for maintaining the chargers? Who's responsible for maintaining, the rest of the equipment? Who's responsible for maintaining, the software? And again, some of these are new companies. They have to figure it out, right? So they don't know in some cases, or they have some basic maintenance. So that means that you're going to do the rest of it. Okay, well, I need to know that before I take this on. So there's a lot of that we go into from the IT side of it. From the fleet management side of it, and by the way, for the IT side of it, we're helping some really big companies, like, try to get. So we have one company that has about 50,000 buses that we're trying to help them transition out of that. And so they have a very aggressive timeline. I don't know if they'll make it or not. I hope they do. But we're helping them from that perspective of really helping guide them down that path and protect the IT organization's interests. On the other side of that, the fleet side, we have some companies that we're helping, and it's still very new. So we haven't really had anybody fully transition their fleet out yet. We have a client in California that will probably be the first one, because, again, California is so, is the most strict, governance around that, and trying to drive these trucks, the ICE trucks and diesel and gas powered trucks, off the road and swap them out as fast as possible. So I have a client out there that probably will be the first one to fully, transition over. But most of our clients are either just in the strategy phase, where they're trying to think through, how do I do this, to getting a few pilot trucks rolling. So we've had a couple, several companies that have got some pilot trucks rolling, and they're happy with that, and everyone loves them. They're really cool technology, but it's just it's a financial equation at the end of the day.
And that's an interesting point, because in the UK and in most European countries, you have one entity that is the UK, and the rules are the rules, and whatever legislation is passed applies to the entire country. So, is it a help or more of a hindrance, the fact that you've got a load of different states that all have their own directives and timelines and so on?
It's it's a great question, actually. It doesn't help, because every state is a little bit different. Every state has different state incentives. There's the U.S. government incentives, which are the Inflation Reduction Act incentives, and so NEVI and all that was born of that. And then there's the EPA that has their own incentives to get like diesel buses off the ground, out of the environment. And so there's a lot of school buses that are getting transitioned out into EVs. So there's all that. But then at the state level, you have every state's a little bit different. And depending on whether they lean left or right, you're going to have some great benefits and incentives, or you'll have none. And so that makes it tough. It makes it tough to kind of figure out, what's the right answer across the U.S. and, collectively as an industry. And so, but typically we see California and the U.S. kind of lead the charge on innovation and change. Historically, it's always done that. And I won't say that California is always has it right. They a big homeless problem
Mm.
right now. So that's
Mm.
not a great answer, whatever that solution was. But there's little things like that. So I think in general, it's we have some teams of people that actually just study and know all of the incentives
Okay,
that are out there and which ones will be
that's
applicable and which ones
helpful.
won't. And then the other problem you have in the U.S., Alex, is that you have to take into consideration that there are 1,400 power companies in the U.S. I mean, actually, we need to fact check that. I may be wrong, maybe 1,600, but
Wow.
there are a lot of different power companies
Mm.
in the U.S. and they all have this little geography, and they're all monopolies, and so they all get protected. So nobody can come and compete in that one little area that they own. So that's a whole nother podcast, but that makes it also difficult. It makes it difficult because now I have different rate plans. I have different, rebates
Mm.
and incentives that may or may not exist based on whatever that power company's interests are. It's a mess. So that the data that we don't have in the U.S. around all these different attributes from, the power company structure to, what transformers and equipment they have out
Right.
there. That's a whole nother nightmare. Like, because a lot of that's not documented and they don't want to share it because they're a monopoly. They don't have to. Like, so it becomes a huge problem. But across all those layers of, between the government layers, the municipalities, the different power companies, that's the challenge. And then getting all that rolled out and, provisioning a new transformer or provisioning a new, electrification of a
Mm.
depot can take a long time. Permitting, like local entity permitting, is a whole nother problem. Like these permit offices they've never really gone through anything like this, so they don't know
Right.
what they're doing. And it's no fault of their own. They just don't. It's their first experience. They don't know, right? So it's there's a lot of time, a lot of pitfalls, and a lot of things that can trip up the electrification of a
Yeah,
site and
right.
trying to get chargers on site.
So, and I guess I know the answer to this already, but if you're dealing with a business and they're national, so they've got sites in potentially every state, does the state that they're based in, is that the rules that you go by, or does the various different factors apply? Have you got to consider every different state's rules and all the different power companies in that one company transformation?
Yes, the answer to that is yes. So, like, if I have a company that is operating in 10 states, I have to go look at all 10 of those states and each of the districts that they're actually operating in, down to the county level, to figure out, okay, well, what's happening, who's your power company, what incentives do you have
Mm.
available to you in each of these areas, and then we pick. Really, the right way to do it is you pick a place to start,
Right.
and so you're not going to do it all at the same time. You're going to do a pilot in one location, choose that one location, and then go from there, and then build on that. And then, but before we even get there, we look at all across all 10 of them, and we try to project what that cost is going to be over a period of time based on what we know now and what we think may or may not happen in the
Mm.
future, to be able to figure out financially, is this
Mm.
viable for you, right? And it may be it's not viable for you to do it in all of your 10 areas that you're in, or 10 states that you're in. And maybe you need to do it in one or two. Like in California, you may not have a choice. You're going
Right.
to have to do it, right? Because they're going to phase diesel
Mm.
trucks out, whether you like it or not. So that's coming. So if you operate in California, you need to get on it. Like, if you're not already, and I think most people have already started to pull at that thread. So, but yeah, so you have to look at it across everywhere that you operate, and then figure out, you know, how the dominoes
Mm.
fall from there.
But I guess in a sense, and this is partly why I asked the question earlier, if you've got a clear indication of which states are first and which are right at the bottom of the priority list, it at least gives you a bit of a kind of business plan or strategy in terms of who to target and where you're going to have success and where you can help people the most. Yeah.
Correct. Yep. Exactly. So it's one of those things where the gold rush and the EV world has
Yeah.
happened out in the West, and in some cases in the Northeast, like New York and Boston and Massachusetts, in that area. But yes, so that's an obvious, okay, well, it should make financial sense because the cost of power, right, is something where we can make that work versus what the cost of gas is in those
Mm.
areas. And so, that's part of the financial equation, as is, what incentives are applicable. There's very heavy incentives in those areas, again, to offset the technology difference in
Mm.
cost and that'll eventually reach parity again, like I said earlier, without having those incentives. But it just takes time, right? It's just like any new technology. It's going in the right direction. It's got its growing pains. It's we'll all work through them, and there'll be a lot of fighting and finger pointing between now and when that point is reached. But it will
probably. And then I guess you've got an eye on next year's presidential election as well to see whether or not all of it just gets thrown out the window. or you doubling down on
that's
it.
a very likely possibility. That would set the industry back a good bit, unfortunately. But it's one of those things where there's a lot of innovation in this industry. In battery tech, you'll hear Elon Musk say that battery tech is already there. I mean, you've got batteries that can give you the range that you need that are comparable, and in some cases even better than what ICE can deliver, gas or diesel. So. And he's right for most drivers, right? Fleets maybe a little different. Their fleet trucks have been running some pretty impressive numbers. There's some North American freight councils here in the U.S. that have been doing some testing that have shown very promising results and learned a lot through those different tests. But I think it's something where the technology will eventually catch up, and in some cases, I think I would be willing to bet on this that in the coming years, you will have a battery that will have more range than you could ever have in a gas-powered car or truck, where you'd be able to drive it for 600 or 1,000 miles before, having to recharge it. And I don't mean like just having a giant battery pack. I mean, the battery efficiency and the efficiency of the technology will catch up so much where you could still quickly recharge that battery in 30 minutes or an hour like you can today, but it'll give you much more range and be much more durable long term. So that's the kind of technology that I think people are looking forward to. And when that hits, that's a real game changer. I mean, imagine driving your car around for a month without having to charge it or fill it.
And is that still with kind of the traditional battery technology that we've got, or are you talking about some new kind of chemical compound that's being brought into it or researched at the moment?
Well, there's a lot of research going on with that. Solid state batteries have been talked about for a while, and I think that's probably one of the better bets to be able to achieve something like that. But I mean, it's there's a lot of new tech coming out, so I think that's something we'll just have to keep an eye on and see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's next?
So right now, actually, I alluded to at the beginning of the podcast, where we're talking to several different multi-family complexes here in the U.S. about basically getting a new company that we formed called EarthX out in some of these complexes and being able to solve the EV charging problem for people that live in apartments and condos. Because right now in the U.S., they can't charge their car like you can if you have a single-family home. So if you have a single family home in the US, you can just call an electrician and have a charger put in your garage, and you come home and you plug your car in and you go inside and you don't think about it. It's just ready to go when you're ready to go. But unfortunately for people that live in, multifamily right now in the US, they don't have that luxury. And the reason is because the cost of these chargers is so high, and the net present value on those chargers is negative. So the developers and owners of these properties don't want to put a lot of them in. They're not incentivized to do that. And there's nothing in the government incentives that is incentivizing them to do that. So they'll put in one or two if the property is lucky, and then everybody in that community has to share those handful of chargers, and that creates some sharing problems. Anytime you have a shared amenity, people will abuse it, bang it up, hog it.
Or park non-electric vehicles in the space, which is always handy. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, ice, that kind of thing as well. And so, and also you can be time limited to how long you can actually use it, to like a couple of hours. So you'll never be able to fully recharge your car overnight. And it makes it really hard to live with an EV if you live in an apartment or condo. So we've designed a new solution that is able to reduce that cost greatly and provide that opportunity for those property owners to put more chargers in to be able to keep up with demand, and be able to have every resident that has an EV have access to a charger overnight. So that's kind of our goal, is to give those people that live in those communities the same overnight charging experience that single family homeowners have.
Love it. Awesome.
Yeah. So we're in the pilot phase. We've got a prototype that's out on some properties right now. So we're very excited about that. And, we're in the early phases of it, but we think it looks very promising.
Very cool, very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, look, Rob, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Where can people find you if they're interested in talking to you?
Yeah, so can be reached at rob@cameroncooley.com. That's CAMRENCOOLEY.com. But yeah, CameronCooley.com is the name of our website, and that's where you can connect with me, and would love to hear from you.
All right, I'll share those details in the sort of blurb as well. Great stuff.
Awesome.
Thanks for your time, man.
Cool, Alex.
See you again.
All right, you bet. Thank you. Okay, take care.